So I'm here today with Eva Crouse, who's my partner in crime. We've done a few of these together. Eva is with Worth Media Group, and she's a terrific editor, and she's great on stage. And I watched you, Eva, with Elley Cheng on stage at Techonomy back in November in New York City. And frankly, you
hmm
did a terrific job, really, with a great panel. So much of the day was focused on AI, which is consistent with how much of our lives are focused on AI. But Ellie, I'll let Eva get you into the thick of what we want to talk about. But I just wanted to say I was blown away hearing you that day and learning about your background. You've you've had a terrific collection of experiences, and you seem to me to be the ultimate right brain, left brain person. You have a mechanical engineering degree, you have a MBA, you've worked in the creative world, you've worked in the science world. You've done so many different things. I'd love to know, where did it all start? Where did you grow up?
I guess I was always one of those kids that was so kind of so curious about everything. To a point, probably, my parents were just thinking like, "Oh my gosh, we give up. I don't know how to shape this kid. What to do with her." So what it turned out to be was, they just let me kind of go and do my own thing, right? And the funniest part was they almost fell off the chairs when they said, "Okay, you got into school. It's a great school." And, I went to Berkeley, and what are you studying? I said, "Oh, I'm studying mechanical engineering." And they were just like, "What?" you know,
Where did that come from?
it was all about this curiosity, right? You're just kind of like, wow, like, this thing is so cool. Well, how's it made? And then you kind of start to take things apart, and you kind of follow those parts and pieces. And you kind of sit there and like, well, how are they related? How are they shaped? Why do you do this? And so it's just this series of whys that led me into thinking like, well, you know what? I think I need to have someone else teach me how to think, right? And so engineering was just the perfect study for that because it tells you how to break things down, make sense of things, solve problems.
Really trained your brain, huh?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's been really helpful. I mean, I thought, even though I'm not an engineer by trade today, but I still use my engineering all the time.
But then you went to the University of Chicago, which is one of the top business schools in the country too.
It was much more creative, especially after school when we head to the bars. So
Were you from Northern California?
I was. So I grew up in the Bay Area, and we it was great because it's also a place where that was before the whole tech industry had really taken over the Bay Area. The biggest industry I remember or company that was around was like Levi's jeans. Yeah, Levi Strauss was right there in San Francisco, and it was
Not exactly a tech
no,
company.
not quite, not quite.
Yeah, so you've seen the whole transition of that area. That's
It was, and
crazy.
it's really fun to watch that. I remember, my when I was a kid, I my uncle was starting to work in tech, and he worked at like places like IBM, and then we would drive through fields and fields to go see our cousins, and now these are not fields; they're like
Google headquarters.
yeah, exactly, right. And so it was just the seeing that transformation and also just seeing the cultural change. It has good and bad that came in. I wouldn't say it's like bad, but it just kind of changed. And so I think that was probably one of the things that any native Bay Area person there would have to deal with very early on was this rapid change brought forth, well, not directly by technology, but by technology, right? And so we just had to kind of learn how to adapt, to learn how to figure out the new reality. When we all joked about how every job in the Bay Area was tech something, you could be a tech banker, tech lawyer, tech doctor, practically, like whatever, every tech dog walker, So always everything had to be a tech. So yeah.
You covered so much of this with Elliot. I'd love to hear how your career progressed in going. I love what you did with Pantone, for example. I think you talked about that a little bit back there in November.
Yeah,
But now you're so knowledgeable and express so many different points of view. Eva, you got Ellie to comment on stage about what we should anticipate tech will do to the pace of change and how it's going to reshape each of
hmm
our lives, each of our careers and industries all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy to get to sit in on this interview, Jim, and be your co-host today because I had such an amazing time speaking with you, Ellie, at Techonomy, and I felt like we could have kept talking for much longer than the duration of the panel. So I'm excited to have a little bit more of a long form conversation today. But yeah, your experience across the creative industry and understanding not just from the consumer side or the business side, but really the intersection of so many different places is really fascinating to me. And something that I would love to hear a little bit more about is what first pulled you toward that intersection of creativity, systems, intelligence, as you're kind of seeing this emerging tech world there in
Yeah,
Northern
I
California.
think about it. We're just talking about my background in engineering, and it really started from my job. My very, very first job out of college, or actually still partly in college, was an engineer. So that was my first real paid job as a design engineer at a semiconductor company. And I loved the work. I was like designing these systems to collect data inside of these big silicon etching chambers that would predict defects and before they happen. And the goal was to optimize this machine runtime while you're reducing waste, right? So it felt meaningful. I was really happy doing it. But funny enough, I sat next to this one senior engineer who's been there for so many years before me. And I remember watching our manager show up at his cube and suggest some changes, and then he walks away. And as soon as the manager left, my coworker would start slamming his folders on his cubicle desk and like furiously, and he would start to mutter angrily to himself too. And I was such a naive, new grad at the time, and I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't understand it. So and I was like, I was thinking in my head, I was like, this work is so interesting. Like, if something's wrong, just talk about it, right? But like that moment stayed with me because it made me realize something else really important, which is you got creativity and intelligence, and these are deeply shaped by the systems that we design around people. And that means who's getting heard, who's getting credit, who has autonomy to do things that they want, what are problems we're choosing to solve, and what are we optimizing for. And so once you start to ask those questions, you realize that intelligence, what we say, whether if it's human or machine, AI, is something that is actively being locked or suppressed, or unlocked or suppressed, right? So someone's making those decisions. So overall, when you think about it, the relationship goes as creativity creates these possibilities, right? And systems get to select from those possibilities. And what survives that selection process is what we end up calling intelligence. So intelligence isn't this all-knowing entity. It's actually just curation. And it's that filtration or filtering system that we need to really pay close attention to, because whether we're designing an organization or an AI process, it the way we design shapes the outcome far more than we think it does.
Well, I remember that day I used a term designing intelligence, and that sounds to me like what you're talking about now. So if we're all talking about an agentic world that will have agents who do things for us, and as a broken down old guy who's trying to learn AI technology, I use ChatGPT, Copilot, Perplexity. I try and use them every day, and I'm wowed every day by what I'm learning I can do on my own. And of course, at the company, we have lots of tools now available to learn more. But it gets me yearning for it to be able to do the next step. So if I've named my ChatGPT agent. I asked her, should I name you? She said yes. That would be a good idea. She said, would you like some suggestions? I said yes. And she said, here's the most common. Here's some funny ones. She said, but as the founder of 1-800-Flowers, why don't you call me Flora?
Sure.
So Flora was born. And then one day, kidding around, I said, Flora, I'm really impressed with people with British accents. She goes, would you like me to be British from now on? I said, yes, I would. So Flora is British, and I have but you really do start to think that Flora is thinking with you. So when you dialogue with Flora, now I yearn now for Flora not only help me to compose or help me to think about this or help me to research that, but now I'd like to say, Flora, just go do that. And Flora can't quite do that yet. Go buy this for me or make that plan for me. She can only prepare it. But so you can see from a behavioral point of view, I'm leaning toward now wanting the next iteration of capabilities from the AI platforms.
No, it's true. I know exactly what you mean, Jim, where something is so mind blowing, and the second you get used to it, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, but I want it to be faster now. And I think that we're seeing that over and over again. And it's this weird push and pull between, oh my God, this is all moving so fast and it's so scary. And oh my gosh. And then also, as we're pushing to implement a lot of these tools, oh, but it needs to be changed a little bit to actually be useful in this way. Or so I think it kind of puts the consumer in a similar mind space to where you've been living, Ellie, which is kind of in that role where you see the potential for the next step and the different use cases for how it could be applied, maybe.
In my crude way of thinking, and even Eva, you were doing things 2 years ago with AI that were knocking my socks off. Work that you were doing in terms of preparing a program, researching who the best speakers on different topics would be. I remember we had talked about something. You came back like a half hour later with this whole presentation. I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" You said, "No, I just did it." And that was work that heretofore would have taken you weeks to do. And that was a couple of years ago you were doing that. But when I look at what the capabilities are, in my crude way of thinking, I think of AI as efficiencies. That's obvious. I can understand that. In a legal department, doing 12 hours of reading a contract doesn't make sense anymore. That I can understand. Automatically updating ledgers, things like that. Efficiencies, I understand that. But capabilities is the next thing that I think you're talking about, which is designing intelligence. The way you design things will give you a certain kind of intellectual output. And I think that's where the breakthroughs in terms of capabilities that heretofore haven't existed, is where I think we get excited. In terms of working at 1-800-Flowers, that's where I get terribly excited. We're basically in the relationship business, and we're developing tools to help our community to have more and better relationships, to be deliberate about their actions and their intent to invest in relationships, whether or not it ever involves expressing themselves with a greeting card that we have, or with buying a gift. But at the beginning of the year, we always talk about developing plans for your relationships. And I wrote a book last year with Dr. George Everly, and we came up with 3 categories of people. These are relationships you have that you want to continue to invest in. These are relationships that you've had, but they've waned over the months or years. And of the 6 of those, these are 3 you want to reinvest in because they're important to you. And then there's relationships that you don't yet have that you want to continue to be deliberate about and invest in. So if you do that work at the beginning of the year or any time in the year, and then we can give you tools that help you to follow through on that. So you read that Eva won this, you wanted to develop your relationship with Eva, and you see that she got this award for journalism. And now your AI agent, your Flora, can tell you, by the way, you said you wanted to invest in your relationship with Eva. And I don't see any correspondence between the two of you, but you just won this award. You might want to drop her a note congratulating her. So that takes you to the world of capabilities, where this is what I want. So the design, and now the capabilities. That's where I get excited about moving beyond efficiencies and moving to capabilities. Is that a reasonable way to think about it?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think there's often a lot of times, especially around this time, people are thinking, about technology as just a way to drive more productivity and efficiency, right? And I think that's
because we can understand it.
Well, that too, right? And I mean, the thing is, like, I think that's such a big misunderstanding to think that that is the only value to be extracted out of this technology. I mean, just like what you're saying, Jim. I mean, in reality, it doesn't just automate tasks, right? It can make decisions. And in fact, some of these agents will change that piece of code or like use different assumptions. And, unless you tell it not to. I mean, that means organizations need to have people to really know how to set those guardrails. And, also just as importantly, know when to bend those rules and which rules to bend, right? So you're talking about how, you're looking forward to having these, technology to expand its capability, start doing things, making better decisions. But then all about how they make those decisions are so important, to have the right guardrails. So it's almost like you need to kind of, make sure that it doesn't cross some lines. I mean, AI doesn't have to worry about going to jail if it commits fraud, right? I mean, it doesn't get fired. It doesn't feel
But if it's your agent,
yeah, unless you tell it what shame is, right? And so I mean, it doesn't have those consequences that humans have to face. I mean, we are social animals. If you screw up, there are a lot of people who can hold you accountable for something. And so then that is the huge difference that matters. And so then, when you have leaders who are just thinking about, oh, let's focus on just productivity, how many headcounts can we take out? That effectively de-skills their workforce. And that actually is the opposite of what you need to do, which is that you actually have to up-level that decision making and judgment at every level of your organization. So all of them know how to shape the outcomes of AI, as especially when it starts to expand its capability that we all want it to be.
Make birthdays even happier with buttercream frosted cookies, dreamy cakes, and more. Wishes come true one bite at a time with tasty surprises from Cheryl's Cookies.
Ellie, when you talk about this misnomer that we have applied AI to making everything more efficient and productive, and that's it. You come from the world of creativity, and I wonder what you think a lot of leaders are getting wrong by looking at it just in that one lane of productivity and efficiency when there is this entire creative scope to consider as well, even in, an organization that isn't Pantone or Adobe or Shutterstock.
I think, what they get right and wrong at the same time about creativity is that, creative is innate and there's infinite amount of it, right? And it's like, everyone's like, if it's so much of it, then you just need productivity tools, just, kind of get it all together fast, right? But when you think a little bit more, creativity is innate. Its definition is that it's the use of imagination and original ideas. And, but what we truly label as creative is actually filtered through a lot of taste and judgment. And for these two qualities, judgment and taste, is all human. It's because it's whatever we personally find to be resonant with ourselves, based on our own lived experiences and our perspectives, right? So for AI to replace creativity, it would require humans to fully decide to outsource that activity. And that means like we want someone else to create for us. We want someone else to tell us what we like and what we don't like. But you only outsource things that you don't want to do, right? And I think there are plenty of humans who enjoy expressing themselves all the time through either creation or curation. So I don't think that AI will stop us from wanting to do what makes us happy, what makes us happy throughout the day. So I think the real question here is who actually gets paid. And is it the individual creators, like the designers, musicians, and writers who create those training content? Or is it those builders of the platforms for those tools, for AI tools? Or is it someone else who uses those tools to monetize whatever that they want to do, which is maybe, they're influencers when you're selling a product or whatever that is. So AI will replace creative labor. I don't disagree with that, especially those very simple repetitive tasks. But it will also enable us to generate a lot of vanilla content that is designed for mass appeal. It's like socks and t-shirts, right? But creativity has always been about breakthroughs and going past the usual, the noise. So there will always be room for newness, perspective, and meaning that we can generate. So I don't ever see creativity getting replaced by AI. And I think, to think that AI is just all about production of stuff it's really the wrong perspective.
We had on our stage, Ellie, back a year and a half ago, I think it was, Eva, Seth Godin. And Seth is a friend of us at Worth Media, and he's a terrific thinker. And he said a year and a half ago, if you're in a job and you're not using AI now to figure out how to do the repetitive parts of your job that can be done by AI, rest assured your boss is trying to figure that out. And if you're not trying to figure out how you could free yourself up to do the things that only a human can do, your boss is thinking about that, and her boss are thinking about that, and you're going to work yourself right out of a job. And that's been ringing in my ears in the 18 months since he said that on our stage. But what you just said, though, makes all the sense in the world, which is, and it begged this question for me: if I'm working in an animation studio at a big movie company in Hollywood, I better make sure that I'm developing my skills and not just getting paid to color in the wings on the angel every other day, you know. But what does it do to the world of animation?
Gosh, I think that ultimately we all have to think about what are the skills that we need to build to future-proof ourselves. And and Jim, you're absolutely right? And there will be some tasks that AI will do a better job, on. I mean, if it's repetitive, if it's simple, there's boundaries that are clear, it will do that fast without needing, any rest or breaks, right? But we have to kind of think about the skills that will last, especially when we're talking about designing the system that would create the right output. And, I would say if you're talking about, specifically if it's like a movie studio or any other creative industry, I would say the three things that you have to carry yourself, that you have to build, which is one, you have to have taste, right? You can't just look at something like, it's good enough, but you got to say that this is something that will break through. This is interesting. I like this. And you can tell a story around it. So, the taste is able to help you distinguish what's real signal from all the noise, all the generated, whatever garbage that's out there. So that is something that you have to have. And the second one I would say is, what we talked about, which is just, AI doesn't go to jail, but you can, which is, the moral clarity, right?
I like what you said before, look to see who gets paid.
Yeah, right. And so then you need to understand who benefits from what you're doing, who's benefiting, who's being excluded, and what is the behavior that we're reinforcing. And the last thing, which is like putting things into reality, is that system thinking that we talked about, right? And which is that how you have to design, the system so you're able to produce the right output, and that would create the right behaviors as well for the long term. And so, meaning,
and having knowledge of system design speaks to future-proofing yourself.
Yes, being able to see through, right? Just being able to, okay, well, I mean, when you think about it, everything we do has a consequence. Even as, going back to my engineering days, I can sit there and happily design my little system. But what happens is once I finish that design, it gets scaled, then guess what? It has long, big impact on the supply chain, on who gets jobs, who's getting the contract, and, what's being built, what are the materials we need to source. I didn't even know. I was just a little engineer making little parts. But then that actually turns out to be millions and millions of dollars for someone down the line. And so then everything we do, once it's scaled, it becomes real impact. So we just have to figure out what we're doing, what kind of impact is it going to drive? Who's going to be hurt? Who's going to be hurt? Who's going to be winning? And because AI is there to help us scale all of that really quickly, so the impact will hit much faster.
Who do you think is still missing from the table in terms of designing these systems and integrating AI into all different components of our life? Like,
the winners are clear. Those who are creating the systems, right? They know what, those who are there controlling the data, the way it's being distributed, what are these default assumptions that, people would take for granted and basically operate based on. They're the ones who hold a lot of power. And those who are missing from the table are those, especially those whose work were, the ones that actually was the one who helped build the systems in the first place. And, these may be creators, journalists, the educators or workers where their outputs, from their labor was there to train and build these models, but their voices in terms of who the system should favor and who should benefit are absent from those decisions. And so then this, I would say this exclusion is done by design, it's not an accident. And because, a lot of people think that, well, this is my work and therefore I should be the one getting the benefits out of it, and not really thinking about, overall who has been part of that. And so then when the people who shape the culture and meaning are being excluded, AI optimizes for the priorities of those who are, who control that infrastructure and the capital. And that could mean scale and more like operational metrics like scale, speed, efficiency, very finance driven, where they may be satisfied in a short term, perspective, but in the long run, without the greater intent to foster this more viable economy, to include those who actually will help drive the advancement of the products and solutions, we basically end up having this golden goose problem where you can get a short-term win very quickly, but you're not paving the way to ensure that you have enough data involvement, and that would help us advance the models that we have built already.
You mentioned before the term, and I repeated it already, future-proofing yourself. What are you doing with an 11 and 13-year-old child to expose them to technology like this? And how do you think about, how do you raise them to be AI native so that they enter the world as young adults in not too many more years, 10 years or so, properly thinking about how they can function in the world, that they have the right tool sets, the right mindset, and your genetic curiosity?
It's funny because I think shaping human intelligence is quite like shaping artificial intelligence in many ways. I mean, sometimes I jokingly kind of yell at my AI and say, gosh, it just feels like I'm talking to a 5-year-old. I'm really, really smart one, to be honest. Way smart.
But you're saying that to your AI.
You know what? Some 5-year-olds can, beat me in some topics. So, there it is. But when it comes to, teaching my kids in terms of how, the relationship that they build with AI, is that you don't just trust it. You have to still build in that innate curiosity. You have to wonder, where is it coming from? Like, what shapes this answer? How do you ask, to kind of show me how you're thinking through this and why did you say this to me? And, being able to, kind of from that, kind of like tracing back to its origin, think about, oh, so this is what shapes it. So this is what I can do to shape it going forward. And so then it's the idea of continuing to encourage curiosity and digging deeper and understanding, like it's just the engineering thinking, which is like, great, here's a machine. I don't just look at it like it's a black box. That's like, where it goes in, something comes out. Like you want to pick that thing apart and be like, well, this is what is working. This is what got transformed. And so then this is now I understand how it's working. And then now you take that thinking and move it to the next level, which is, okay, if this is the way it's working, what can I do to shape it to do what I want it to do in the future? And that goes back to what we were talking about, and understanding the guardrails. How do you set the boundaries?
Eva, those poor kids.
They're
honestly
smart. It's like they're so native that's just like to them, like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like I already did that. So can you tell me the next thing? So they're teaching me.
From gratitude to comfort, new beginnings to birthdays, celebrate life's moments with something special. Find the perfect gift at Harry & David. We make it easy to be thoughtful.
how would you recommend that the average person who is experimenting with AI, playing around with ChatGPT, with Gemini, with Notion, a whole bunch of these other platforms, how would you recommend that they begin to shift their thinking away from experimenting with, oh, what can you do, to how are you doing that? What are the first steps for somebody to kind of start shifting that mindset?
I think it's funny because when I talk to a lot of people, people really fall into a few categories. Like, when it comes to AI, and you see some of them, they go from one camp to the other. You got first group, which is like AI is like a fork. They just hold on to it and just try and figure out where to stab it with. And so it's a tool that is there to do one thing, and let's get it done. And then some people would be like, kind of starts off with this, kind of like thinking AI is this magic crystal ball. It's like this magical thing that's just like, it feels so smart. So
That's how I feel.
but then like they don't question it. They treat it like it's this like, truth telling crystal ball. It's like, yes, this is what it is. Yeah,
or somebody
that's
to
true
fall in love
too.
with.
Right, and then you got the funnier ones, which is like the fatalist, who's like, here's Skynet, everything's taking over by robots, this is inevitable, and I'm just like, look, I can't even get my vacuum cleaner that's supposed to be intelligent to work. It's gonna stop vacuuming this one corner, And so then it gets to exaggerate too much of just the level of sophistication and timeline of advancement. And so then so I think eventually we kind of get over these characters, and we all kind of start to up level ourselves and land at a place where we realize like AI is really powerful, but it's not like it's completely autonomous. And we have to shape its outcome. We have to design around it. So again, going back to like, we have to go into design with intent of like, what do we want it to do? And so then I think once you start thinking about it that way, you start to take control back into your own hands and start to question and start to think about, okay, well, how am I really going to use this tool?
You remember that day back in New York at Techonomy, I mentioned to you that there was a young lady in the crowd who I just met a few months before. She's just graduated in December from St. John's University with a degree in international business and a minor in French. And I asked a couple of people in the crowd there as I pointed her out. She's a terrific young lady. And I said, what advice do you have? Because she hasn't taken a single AI class because none were offered. And what advice would you have for her? She's going on for a master's right away now, but some people think you should work in between your bachelor's and master's. I think she just wants to get through it while she has the rails in place. What advice do you have? You're ducking a question about the 11 and 13-year-old, what you're exposing them to. What about the soon-to-be graduate? What should they be doing to prepare themselves so that they have the tools to be able to see the world, how it's changing, and go where the puck is going?
Yeah, I think I do think that this change, with technology, has really a true impact on the new grads, and the reason is because for someone with a lot of experience, we haven't been the ones building things with our bare hands for a long time. We just know who do we pull together, and what resources we need to find, and what we understand a vision, and we know what good looks like. But the problem is a lot of the new graduates, they don't know what good looks like yet. And because they haven't lived those experiences, haven't seen things fail, having like things may be theoretically great, but then you're like, oh my gosh, good luck with that. There'll be 17 different things that will pop up to your side and like attack you from the back. You didn't know that, but I do. I've done it 7 times. And so those are the lessons that we learn through battles. But for those who are new, they don't know that yet. And so then it has, this idea of replacing a lot of the junior workers does deprive them of that experience for them to get battle tested over time. And I think that it's...
And we know that work is social too. It's not just the work you do. It's a social environment.
Absolutely. So, I think it's, they absolutely need to just kind of get in somewhere. Just not just like, even if it's unpaid, even if it's internships or whatever it is, maybe just kind of start connecting with people and start talking and start doing and start to kind of see the real life lessons of, understanding what does good look like? What are we trying to achieve? Even if it's like a marketing program, like, what are you trying to do? And it's like, is it just clicks? We just optimize for clicks? Like, well, I'll tell you, a lot of clicks doesn't, mean revenue. There's a lot of stuff that goes in between from clicks to revenue. So, just even understanding how that works, and you're realizing, oh, that's the ultimate goal, or these are all the little holes that can, appear in your little bucket. That's really helpful. And so, and by having those contextual stories, that would help them to demonstrate that they have seen the battle, they know what good can look like, and now they're combining with their ability to use technology. I think they can actually come out ahead, farther than the prior generations.
Something you said when we spoke at Techonomy that has really stuck with me is that the creative landscape might change with the integration of AI, but artists always adapt. And I wonder how you're predicting, like 10 years from now, how do you think that the creative industry, say in fashion or in architecture, will have shifted as AI kind of sweeps in? What are you hoping to see?
10 years is not a lot of time, by the way. and
Seems like forever.
Sometimes it's like,
it is a
that's
world of
true.
AI,
That
though.
is
We're
true.
moving fast.
It's funny. It's kind of like, it's like watching, everything unfold in like, a time lapse video. And I would say that my hope of us coming out of this period of this major information and intelligence revolution that we're in is that we can deepen our understanding of humanity, and in that we can be more intentional to think about what we value, and not just kind of think about making things bigger, better, and faster, or whatever it is, but more about creativity, judgment. What does dignity look like, and what meaning do the things we do hold? And so I realized that I hope that we realize that intelligence is not about or AI is not about replacing humans, but but what it actually does is that it ends up revealing our priorities. It actually tells us very quickly what are the systems that we have built for ourselves, who we've decided to reward, and who are we ignoring. And so, my concern is not about the speed. My concern is about what is quickly training us to become. So, to be honest, I think, this is not a long time. There will be growing pains. People will be left behind by AI, before the institutions know what to do with it about that. And policy, for better or worse, will always lag technological change, as well as, changes and shifts in social structure. So there will be efforts to bridge that gap. You might have educators, communities, or even like nonprofits, like my nonprofit Useful Arts, who will try to address these pieces of problems, but those efforts can only go so far. And so then if we together are not willing to slow down and ask those hard questions about value, power, and responsibility, the risk is that we're not just building these systems, these like technical systems, that we are letting those systems define our future by default, instead of us taking control and choosing that future.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ellie. Honestly, it's been such a pleasure, and I'm really happy that we were able to continue the conversation that we started on stage at Techonomy in November. And I know that we're going to be continuing the conversation further into the future. And
sounds great. I look forward to it. And I hope you guys
Ellie, thanks so much. You're terrific.
Thank you.